Hey, motherboard manufacturers, your manuals suck. Here are a couple of ways that you can improve them for free. Welcome to Gadget Blues. This is KC, and today we're going to talk about a couple of easy ways that motherboard manufacturers can improve their manuals to increase customer satisfaction without spending one penny. So Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, ASRock, are you listening? Because this is free advice. This kind of thing has bothered me for years. Through P4, P5, P6, P7, and modern boards, it's all the same. It's all the same crappy manuals, and they have the same drawbacks. For one thing, the back of the manual is completely blank except for the logo in everybody's manual. Every manufacturer, every version for the last 20 years. That's a space that you should be using for quick reference for the most important things that you need to know for assembling a system. It's just wasted space. So that's my first bit of advice. Put something useful on the back. What should you put on the back? Well, the two things that you really need to know for an experienced system builder to put together the system is A, what slots the memory goes in. Because that isn't always the same across motherboards. You would think it would be intuitive that you would populate the slots closer to the CPU first, but that's not the case. And you've got a mix of systems today that use dual channel memory, quad channel memory, and some of them start with the slot closest to the CPU, some of them start with the next one over, and the order is not intuitive, so you should point out what slots the memory goes in. If you're populating all slots, obviously it's easy, but usually you aren't. The second thing you need to know is where to connect the front panel connectors for power on, reset, hard drive activity, power LED, and so forth. Those are sometimes silk-screened onto the motherboard next to the pins, but usually that's a very crowded area and it's very hard to see those little indicators on the motherboard. Some manufacturers in higher-end boards include these handy little jumpers where you connect the front panel connectors to these pins, which are clearly pointed out here, and then connect this to the motherboard. Now that's handy, but not all boards have this. So you have to crack the manual to find out where to put those front panel connectors. And where is that in here? Well, it's not there. It's still not there. Where the heck is it? Oh, there it is. On page 28. Page 28. That's ridiculous. Then when we find that bit of information, sometimes it's incredibly tiny and poorly laid out. You can get the gist of it from here, but the Asus explanation is much better than this ASRock. For the RAM slots, which are the other essential thing, let's look in this Gigabyte manual. This is a really difficult to decipher table of what memory goes where. Why don't you just point this out graphically instead of this really impenetrable table of DDR4_1_1A. What the heck? Just tell us what slots it goes in. Asus does a better job at that with a little bit of a graphical representation. If you're designing these graphics, your model should be IKEA, not a technical manual. On this, I don't even have to read English in order to understand what slots the memory goes in. Here is a mock-up of the back page layout that I'm talking about. Here we have the location of the front panel header on the motherboard, and then the connectors laid out in a graphical representation that is easy to read and not in 4-point type. Then below that, we have that nice Asus style graphical representation of what slots the memory goes in, which is easy to read at a glance without even understanding the language. That should be on the back of the manual that is otherwise a wasted space. Bingo, you just got a higher level of customer satisfaction from every experienced system builder because they don't have to go sorting through to page 28 or whatever to find this valuable information. I know that may seem trivial, but if you're a pro and you're assembling random systems out of various motherboards in the course of your day, that really adds up. And even for individuals that only assemble a few systems a year, just the goodwill of doing this is well worth the effort, which is just a couple of minutes of cutting and pasting. The other thing that you should be doing, especially on motherboard platforms like the X99, which is a very complex setup in terms of all the PCI Express lanes and where they're routed and so forth, is for the love of all that's holy, please include a functional diagram of the system. Almost everyone fails to do this. This is a Gigabyte manual, but even Gigabyte doesn't do this all the time. The only company that does this 100% of the time and does it with all of the information that you need laid out accurately is Supermicro. All of the Supermicro workstation boards have a marvelous functional diagram that lets you decide what slot to put each device in so it doesn't conflict with anything and you get the right number of PCI Express lanes assigned to it. This is so valuable because it's almost impossible to figure out after you get the motherboard. You can do a lot of trial and error and inference based on what you think things are connected to on the system. You can never come up with a fully accurate picture just by looking at the specs and the layout of the board itself. You have to have the functional diagram. This doesn't matter for people that buy a system, put in one graphics card and nothing else, but it's the people that are power users that install PCI Express SSDs and 10 gigabit cards and all this other kind of stuff along with dual graphics cards and are buying these high-end X99 systems that are really your best customers. Your margin on $400 to $600 motherboards is so much higher than your margin in $60 motherboards that it's the type of customer you really want to cater to. And this type of customer wants this information. Make sure it's there. I will buy one motherboard over another strictly because I download the manual before purchase and it'll have the block diagram. I build complex systems with multiple GPUs and other cards, and I have to have this information. Make sure it's in your manual. Remember I mentioned the IKEA standard for the manual. MSI here is starting to approach this with some good instructional graphics that you don't really have to understand English to use. However, this could be even better. It doesn't need all of this text in here. You could make it larger, make it more self-explanatory, and it would be much, much better. Link to a YouTube video, that's also a big step forward. But you don't have access to YouTube if the system you're building is your system. It would be much better to take this information out of the manual because there's nothing in here that's specific to this model of motherboard and put it in a fold-out. MSI got started on this. Here is one of their fold-out inclusions that has the instructions, but this is impenetrable. It has all these tables of different languages with text that you don't really need. It's got small photos where if you just took the same fold-out and big graphical representations of the installation steps, it would be so much more effective than this. They went to a lot of trouble to put this together, and it's basically useless. Use the IKEA method, folks. Simple graphics, less text. There are a lot of other things I could say about motherboard design, but those are the top bits. The big bullets that are free and they'll really let you increase customer satisfaction are the back of the manual, the functional diagram in the manual, and if you want to spend a few cents, make a decent fold-out with an IKEA-style quick installation guide instead of printing the same thing over and over in the manual that no one reads. So that's my quick little rant about motherboard manual design and how it can be easily improved without spending any money. If you work for one of these motherboard manufacturers, please push these suggestions through your user ed department and you will have an advantage over your competitors until they figure it out as well. If you know anyone that works for a motherboard manufacturer, tell them about this video. If you are an end user, provide this feedback to your motherboard vendor and hopefully they'll listen at some point. Please like and subscribe, and we will catch you in the next Gadget Blues video.